Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to 92. Please, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nice to see all of you live in person here at 92 NY. And those of you that are online as well. This is an interesting event this evening. I'm Sue Solomon, by the way. I'm the Senior Director of Talks. And thank you, thank you. I never got a little applause on that line before, but thank you. Before we begin, I just want to tell you quickly to please go to our website and check out some of the upcoming events. Willie Nelson and Whoopi Goldberg are doing a virtual talk. It'll air on September 28th. Gina Davis is going to be here on October 11th. Neil deGrasse Tyson and Gayle King are going to be here on October 19th. And Pulitzer Prize winner Stacy Schiff, talking about Samuel Adams, will be here in December on the 13th. But there's so much more going on. Go online and check it out, please. I want to explain very quickly audience questions. 3x5 cards are going to be passed out. If you have a question, please write it down. The ushers will collect them. We'll get to as many as we can. And I hope you all know that we rely on your generosity and your kindness to bring events like this to you. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce someone who is a great friend of 92Y and of rock and roll. He's a director of our board, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and a founding trustee of the Bruce Springsteen Archives and the Center for American Music. He's the founding partner of JANA Partners and a New Jersey native, which explains so much. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Barry Rosenstein.
Good evening. I'm Barry Rosenstein, and as the senior New Jersey born and bred 92nd Street Y board member, it is my honor to welcome you here tonight. As you can see, or maybe you can't, but I'm a bit bruised and battered, still recovering from some brutal spine surgery. But nothing at all was ever going to keep me from coming here tonight. I think tonight is going to be considered to be the greatest night ever at the Y. Jan Wenner has been the curator, the communicator, the narrator of public culture, politics, and music for more than 5 decades. And if Jan is the storyteller, then the man who will be interviewing him tonight is the story we've all been listening to ever since. And so that's it. So please welcome to the stage here at 92nd Street Y, my friend Jan Wenner and his friend of over 40 years, an interviewer of choice. Join me in welcoming Bruce Springsteen.
Hello. Hello. Just to set up the evening, I am not actually an interviewer. I am really here to throw Jan some softballs and get a couple of stars extra on my next album review. So, you know, we're hoping we have a very transactional relationship, but. Jan and I have known each other a long time. We're both old men attempting to gracefully face our extinction. Glasses. Hearing aid. We are both in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Only one of us has not been to Burning Man? 3 times. But I'm glad to be here tonight with my friend, and so let's try and start at the beginning. Jan was born on Rainbow Road. Where else, man? Right? I know of no more perfect metaphor for the arc of Jan's life than being born on Rainbow Road.
That was the first thing I did in the book, is I realized you're always trying to get that opening sentence, where you start, and that was it, the perfect thing, rainbow, because I knew it would lead to at the end of the rainbow.
Well, I want to hear a little bit, coming from Freehold, Rainbow Road was like Middle Earth or something. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in hearing you describe a little bit of your childhood.
Well, what I realized at the beginning is my childhood was like a typical post-war baby boom childhood. I was born in the first month of 1946, which was right after the war. My parents were both in the Army and the Navy, and they met there. And they moved out from New York to the West Coast to kind of follow the post-war dream. And so I was at that leading edge of the baby boom, and I realized later, there must have been some reason for that it exemplified somehow everything. I went through everything that everyone went through in the 50s. So growing up in new suburbs, going to the new schools were being built, jumping under your desk for the atomic bomb. And soon enough, discovering rock and roll and Elvis Presley at the beginning. So it was just kind of a classic childhood of that era. And then also I discovered that my pediatrician in New York had been Dr. Spock, who was...
Wow.
Legendary, not that Dr. Spock, not the ear one. And he was like considered responsible for the raising of the rules for the post-war baby boom, which were called spare the rod and spoil a child. And so I was also part of that indulged generation. But it was classic, putting dimes on railroad tracks.
Sure.
We would go into the town when I was like 10 years old in the nearby town and press our heads up against the Sears window of the candy counter and sort of look lonely and poor and hungry, and then she'd hand you the chocolate, which was great, and until I was sent away to boarding school and introduced to a whole nother world.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. You went to Chadwick School?
Chadwick School.
Tell me a little bit what that was like. I mean...
It was like a change of life. All of a sudden I was with a bunch of kids who were more at my early intellectual level, rather than being at a public school where just, anything goes, and where at public school you learn just to shut up. If you know the answer, don't say it, which was a struggle for me. But there, I felt much more kind of my peer group, and you're away from home, my parents were getting divorced, and all of a sudden you're on your own, totally on your own. And in an environment that's meant to coddle kids, or with people and teachers who know how to handle obstreperous adolescents. I mean, that's their specialty. So you're just in a place where you made new friends. And after 5 years of being in the same boarding school with the same kids, it's your family. So you're with just another family.
I always think of boarding school like Lord of the Flies or something. Wasn't it cruel or?
It wasn't quite that. It wasn't that bad. It was a progressive boarding school. But there I discovered, for some reason, I wanted to be the editor of the yearbook and the editor of the newspaper and all these kind of things, and running for student council. And before I'd been like this outcast.
Did you do all that?
Yeah.
See, that's kind of wild to me.
Yeah.
I didn't do all that. But,
no.
So
you were thrown out of that boarding school.
In boarding school, you started to write for the student newspaper. Give me an idea of where that came from and how that started.
I don't know. The most memorable thing was I started a school newspaper, student newspaper there when I was elected to student council, a paper meant for the students and students only. And the theme of the school was the Mariners and Dolphin and all this nautical stuff. So I called my newspaper the Sardine. And
Good.
Then looking back at the Sardine, in there is something as a feature. When I was 16 years old, there's a feature in that thing on the front page called Random Notes every day, every issue. So which I stole that point from the New York Times, which they don't realize, but they. And anyway, and then we had the motto was all the news that fits. So
The sardine, that would have worked as a alternative book title also.
Yeah.
I think. But, so
like a sardine. Yeah.
you wrote for the student newspaper, then Berkeley, right?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about your time there.
Berkeley was yet another world, and another moment where I felt I was at the beginning of something, like the beginning of the post-war baby boom, which I didn't realize that at the time. But at Berkeley came together three elements for me. It's a hotbed of political protest. It was the beginning of the student protest movement in the United States. Before I got there, they had the Slate, a campus organization, had run the House Un-American Activities out of town in demonstrations, and was now in a fervor of a political protest on campus by the free speech movement. Berkeley had also been sending an enormous number of students south to work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in doing sit-ins and bus riding and all that early organizing stuff in the South. Anyway, it became a kind of pivotal and galvanizing political moment on campus with the demonstrations, which was followed by my discovery of drugs and was followed by my discovery of rock and roll. But the epiphany there was, in the student protest movement, I was walking on campus one day, and there was a sit-in demonstration going on in the main plaza of the campus, and Joan Baez was singing to the students. There's like 5,000 people gathered, and she was singing a Dylan song, "With God on Our Side." And up to that moment, I'd been, kind of a preppy, sort of fratty type, and when I heard that, and heard her singing, the beautiful, pure voice, and those ideas of Dylan's, you never ask questions with God on your side, and how the killers of Jesus, even Judas Iscariot, had God on his side. And that thing just made me start to question everything and think, I have to do something, and I was hearing it in the music.
And you say that the rock and roll and music was the glue that held the generations together, which was a good way of putting it. If you were, but also I find at Berkeley you were in the middle of your tribe, which, in Freehold there was no tribe, The only tribe was the other tribe that was trying to kick your ass for the way that you looked, But the thing that was so important to me initially was the day I walked into that first newsstand and saw that first copy of Rolling Stone. There was that tremendous feeling sort of like, okay, I am not completely alone out there. And, it came out bi-weekly, it came out, and, I was down there every, the minute they got it off the truck, It was just incredibly, it was the first periodical that wrote about rock music the way that I felt about it, and the way that the few guys that I hung out with felt about it, was it was the survival guide for us at the time. It was really, something that was essential. Now, this was 1967.
I first heard rock in 65. The Stones had Out of Their Head out, and I think I was 61. And I was listening to this like crazy, and all the times, and the mamas and papas, just the great stuff. And the more I heard it, the more I wanted to be part of it. You heard something, and it's hard to define. It was the singing, the tone of the singing, the words were sensational. I mean, they were really about kind of everything in your own life you were going through. And
you did attempt, didn't you, to play an instrument?
Yeah, I did. This is where you and I part. I should have played the instrument. You should have been the interviewer. But so the impulse in just trying to, relieve that life that the Beatles were leading, of fun and enjoyment and liberation. I wanted to just celebrate that spirit and tell the world about it and honor it. And I really couldn't play very well. I tried writing freelance articles. I was asked to do a review of Sgt. Pepper's Band for High Fidelity magazine, which was then a very big magazine. It was rejected for being too hyperbolic. That's exactly what they said to me. It couldn't be that good.
Oh, that was good. That's good.
And so the choice was, I knew I wanted my life to be in rock and roll, and they're just that simple. And what I knew I could fall back on finally was I had this editing experience and this hankering for magazines, and I wanted it to be totally respectful of rock and roll and what rock and roll had become. It had become both so much more fun and liberating than ever, but also so full of serious content and messages. And I just wanted to send that letter out. I wanted to spread the word, and as far as would it go. And Ralph always said Rolling Stone felt like a letter from home.
Yeah, it definitely did. If you were in the far lands of New Jersey, I can tell you that. But so Rolling Stone co-founded with Ralph Gleason, early mentor, I guess.
Early mentor. He was 42, I think, at the time, or 48. And the knock on Ralph, he was a jazz critic who loved rock and roll. At a point in which rock and roll was not terribly respectable, and certainly not to a jazz person. This was terrible, that junk kids music. But he saw it in the Beatles and Dylan and Simon Garfunkel right all that time. But anyway, they mocked him as being a 40-year-old who couldn't decide whether he was 3 16-year-olds or 4 12-year-olds. And he, like me, we shared the same understanding of music and the power of it, that the musicians were the true poets of our time, and that they were going to be the true leaders of our time, and they spoke with a voice that was the glue that held the generation together.
Yeah, it's the interesting thing was it seemed like from the beginning you had a vision for Rolling Stone as to be more than a music magazine. You wanted to cover politics and cultural issues and put that all in one place, which is sort of that was the nature of the generation at that moment. Was these things were all coming together in one big stew. If you were a musician at the time, I wrote an enormous amount of awful music that was politically intended, when I was 17 or 18 or 9. But, that was a part of being an essential part of things. But
part of the beauty and magic of rock and roll is that it did stand for stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Doug, I'm sorry.
I don't know what's going on here.
I missed that.
That it carried messages about, social justice, about justice in general, about human rights. They were embedded in the songs, but all those songs that Dylan were singing and the Beatles were singing, they all carried that message, and somehow it was implied, although not obvious, that the music was very much about politics and society. And some people could read that and see that and want to be part of that. But the conventional wisdom at the time is they didn't mix. It was like, politics is wrong, you can't get near that, and it's useless. And on the other side, the political people think people are just, taking drugs all the time, and, not, where are you going to carry your salt in this situation?
Well, it was interesting because I had a late night conversation with Bob Dylan, and was sitting on the couch, and he said the timing had an enormous amount to do with the impact that he had at that particular moment. In other words, there was a call out for people at that particular time who would seize that particular moment in their different fields, and so yeah, timing is important, but you've got to step up and step into the fire and have the balls to kind of go in there and write music or make the magazine. That's 1967. There seemed to be this enormous, wide open lane for something that spoke to the post World War II generation.
Absolutely. And I was, I guess, one of those people caught by Dylan, or taken in by what he had to say galvanized by or whatever the good word is, crystallized. And very much his path. I mean, that's why we called it Like a Rolling Stone. It was named after Bob's song. And to me, Bob was the most important voice of those times, and still, you know, as important as today. He sings Like You Do Not, as I've written about age and growing up and so forth. But that was it. That told people to step up, and we wanted to follow that path that Bob was setting, that idea and that aesthetic and that ethic, you know. And it wasn't obviously political. It wasn't go elect this person as president. Bob was asked once in a press conference, he said, "Are you with do you belong to the left party, left wing, or the right wing party?" He goes, "No, I belong to the up and down party." And it was that kind of disdain for the obvious dullness of the politics, getting us nowhere that wasn't in of itself political, that we will reject that and we'll just do another kind of it. And it was cultural politics. And culture came to take over the political dialogue.
Right. You know, it's now, you know, one of the things Rolling Stone did was it was an enormous canvas for all the great writers that Tom Wolfe and Hunter Thompson and my old friend Paul Nelson, and Greil Marcus, of course, Mr. John Landau, you know, Dave, P.J. O'Rourke, and the political writer that Matt, I'm sorry, yeah, I love him. You know, how did you sort of come in contact with all these different people, and then how did you edit them? They seem like that seems like that's a tough job.
Well, the way, I mean, you read and watch things. I mean, with Hunter and Tom, I had read earlier works of theirs when I started magazine, and just really wanted to have them on board. I really spent a lot of time pursuing Tom and courting him. Hunter was kind of a random accident, but when I met him and he came in, I just was like bowled over by, you know, what do I have here? But it was a time, you keep your eyes up, but also people, good writers and reporters wanted to write for Rolling Stone because they see other stuff, and it was like the New Yorker used to be. It was everybody's dream to write for the New Yorker. So I had at the beginning all these newspaper reporters from around the country, from the Detroit Free Press, or the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the LA Times, who were looking for freedom and the right to say something, the right to write length, and just set a new bar. And the whole initial Rolling Stone was based on newspaper reporters. All of them had daily experience, including Tom and Hunter. But so it was a combination of both. And for the writers, what attracted them, we did give them space. We gave them freedom. We gave them good editing, and we gave them great story ideas if they didn't have them their own to pursue. And the other, in terms of talent, I mean, I happen to be good at handling talent and understanding talent, whether it's literary or musical.
That's an interesting thing. Because if you are steeped in narcissism, as I certainly am,
Not me.
and I would imagine that you are,
We part ways there again.
you know, you are playing the role of basically a producer.
Yeah.
You know, that you're not at the center of the thing. You're attempting to. You know, the artist is. You're not the artist in that sense. You know, so how did you find it easy to play that role, and who was hard and who was easy, and did that just come naturally to you, the editor's role, or?
I guess it came naturally. I mean, you learn. All the talent is slightly different, has slightly different ways, but I think the key is, well, first off, you can't be an ego person in general. I mean, forget that. The star is the writer, not even for bad, not for bad egomaniacal, but just the act that they're doing all the time, whether it's playing it, they're working on a craft that is intensely personal and in a certain sense lonely. But they're the star. But I always found the model is you want to steer the talent in a direction that it wants to go, and let them. You know, you see what each of them, their needs are, and you just kind of. Some people you have to put a hand on. Other people just step out of the way. I mean, I didn't do much editing on Tom Wolfe, you know, and the only reason I was editing You know, the most editing I ever did on Hunter was just because he couldn't make the deadlines and because he was some frenzy. And so I knew better than anybody how to stitch his stuff together and make it work and write the headlines and the transitions. But it was all different. You've got to be, as a producer, you've got to be an inspirational figure.
You got to have the trust.
You got to have the trust.
You know?
And I think the best artists and the best writers were all people who wanted the editing and wanted the attention. Because what is the role of the editor, the producer, but to pick up your stuff and polish it and make it better and improve your thing, you know? And understanding that the real gift there is the body of work that you've done as the artist or the writer. But, you know, my job is to deal with commas and clean it up. You know, I'm not the creative artist.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. But,
well, I must say, Landau.
I could never do that. You know.
You're totally different, but the best artists and the best writers are always self-editing and know their own work the best and how to make it the best. And that's when you step out of the way. John Landau would tell me that what he did in great part for you was he edited you.
He did.
He tried to find which of that stuff you're saying and all that thing that really worked was really strong. He described his role as an editor.
Well, he took some of my hyperbolicness, which I display without second thought on certainly my first and second record. And he showed me a way to sort of edit for greater power, you know. And that was when we cut Born to Run, you know, that was the essential thing, but previously unheard of thing that he did. You know, he just had a tremendous talent for sort of, you know, cutting the fat out of your work and giving you a voice that it became more accessible without losing its depth or its power. You know, so that was very important. Well, let's get to the important questions. You seem never afraid of being controversial. You know, now, you know, I heard you once fired a writer for writing a negative review of a Hootie and the Blowfish album. I personally respect that, but I don't know if that is that a legend or is that true? And were you that wild-eyed a fan of the Blowfish or
no,
what?
It's got a kernel of truth, which you may not like. It wasn't. It was the then temporary music editor at the time said to me that her proudest achievement was keeping Hootie and the Blowfish off the cover in the time in which they were intensely popular. And I just thought that is the wrong attitude here. You know, I mean, they deserved it. They were huge. Now, maybe in retrospect, I was right. I mean, maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was right. But no, I didn't.
Okay.
I fired Dave Marsh. I've fired a lot of good people. I said, there is a born radio personality.
Now, when Rolling Stone moved to New York City, I'd say if there was a before and after that people look at, that was a big move. Where did that come from? Because you're sort of saying that was just a big move symbolically, and how did that alter what the magazine became, and what your intent was and your goals were?
It's another one of those moments where it was a matter of timing, you know, it worked out, which I didn't see at that time. I came to New York, we moved to New York, partially because my wife Jane was scared there was going to be another earthquake in San Francisco, and she didn't want to be there for that. And I thought, okay, that's legitimate. But to make it was out of ambition. I wanted the magazine to get bigger. And the talent for magazines in writing and advertising was all in New York City. The magazine at that time was half New York, half in San Francisco, and we just simply had to be in one place. And so it was really to grow the magazine with all that access to talent. But what I didn't, then the unexpected consequences were, at that time, really San Francisco had lost its creative energy of the 60s and that rock scene there and all that, the arts and the germinating of the Black Panthers and all the political stuff. It all dissipated. I mean, Ralph was dead and it just lost all its oomph. And meantime, the cultural gravity in the country had started to move to New York. We didn't see that at the time. It was New York, Ford to New York dropped dead, you know. So we came back at a time of another huge renaissance in culture, and that was in New York. The final thing is that it changed the character of the magazine, because if you come to New York, you're coming to New York to succeed, to be ambitious. And if you're like in that San Francisco state of mind, you can go live in Marin County for the rest of your life, and your hair will go long and gray, and you'll never have made it. But if you wanted to be in New York, you had to hustle. You had to work. You had to achieve. You had to be ambitious.
Yeah, it was kind of, joining the grown-ups in a funny sort of way,
Exactly.
which was frowned upon in our world, but interviewing people that you interview, you're a good interviewer, and of course there's a great interview you did with John Lennon early on. Can you want to talk about some of the folks you interviewed?
Well,
I mean, I'm sure Bob Dylan's always a challenge, and who have you?
The two most challenging people are Bob and Mick Jagger. Neither of them really wants to say much about themselves or reveal too much, and are almost in a way kind of bored with it. They've certainly had, in those two long careers, and the intensity with which people view them and follow them, they just soon not be bothered. And maybe they're natural. Mick is like an English person, they have no much of emotions, and they're very good at small talk. Anyway, Bob is very eloquent in what he does say, and it's not that much of a challenge when you really think about it. I mean, when I first interviewed Bob for the first time, I'd sat there and I'd ask him a question, and he wouldn't say anything. And he would look at me after I wouldn't say anything back, because I wanted to speak, and I thought I could make him feel a little awkward, and then he'd have to give it up. Bob looks at you in the eyes and doesn't move. He's just, I'm not going to answer that question. You have to move on. But that technique, by the way, of just shutting up and waiting, that extra beat, the person you're interviewing usually thinks, well, I haven't answered that last question quite satisfactorily. Let me try a little harder. And the elaboration is great. Easy people to interview are yourself,
I'm easy.
Bono, Pete Townsend. All you have to do is ask one question.
Yeah, we can't shut up.
Yeah, I mean, it just... with some, yes. And then the politicians are tough because they're so programmed to, usually you interview them when they're running for office, which is what my interviews always were. They're in the middle of a presidential campaign. In an environment they know that they make one mistake, they can be run fucking out of town by the Republicans. For just one silly thing, one meaningless thing. So everything, and plus everything they want to say has been pre-tested and polled, and what the right position is, and so it's tough to get them off the message. But I think my interviews with them all turn out good, because instead of asking kind of gotcha questions or what they thought about the NATO pact or whatever it would be, I would just try and examine them personally. How are you feeling about this job? What's the most fun thing? How do you feel when Gorbachev walks in and says this, that, and the other thing? What was it like to shake hands with Arafat? Stuff like, and then you measure the individual and get a real sense of them. And they were all different. I mean, like Al Gore was a real show-off in terms of he knew everything in the world. The name of every prime minister in West Africa, okay. And you had to stop that and say, enough. And Bill was like that too, a real kind of show-off, and talk about, he was really interesting because he'd say things like, they got, talking about that NATO, I said, well, they got madder than a hen in a, backyard, some southern-ass thing that was fun. And Obama was like this totally cool customer who was really frustrating to interview, because Obama speaks slowly in measured terms. He can form a full sentence, whether it's 5 words or 50 or 70 words, and he knows where he's going, and he certainly is not going to say what you want to say.
All right. And what's it like interviewing President Obama after Hillary's loss that morning?
Oh, man, that was an incredible episode. We had set up I was getting one of the 2 exit interviews he was going to do at the end of the presidency, and it was pre-scheduled by a month, and we do it the day after the election in the White House. And so I thought, and I prepared for an interview, which was going to be like, isn't it great? What's your lessons for the country? And how do you think Hillary, what's your advice for Hillary? And blah, 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 yeah. The night before was certainly one of the depressing nights, and waking up that morning, we might have spoken that morning, I don't know. But I called the White House and said, do you want to just skip it and we'll do it another time? And he said, and Obama said, no, come down now, let's do it now. So I went down to Washington, down my son Gus. You get off the plane, it was cloudy and miserable and cold, and we go to the White House, and it was deserted. There was like nobody there. I mean, it was empty. They'd been up all night before. Nobody's there except like 3 staff aides and Obama, who's dressed in coat and tie and ready for business. And you want to say, how do you really feel about the Trump thing? I mean, that is the most depressing thing. What are we going to do? And you knew that you really couldn't ask those questions because he wasn't there to diss the next president of the United States. He was there. The tradition was to be supportive. And I said, come on. And I kept on saying that, come on, Barack, be honest. You have to respect his position, and I did. And he said, well, that when he sits here in this desk and there's a portrait of George Washington on the wall, and it'll change him. I said, I don't think at age, 76 it's going to change. But, you move off that point. And he finally says, look, if you want to get depressed and you want to curl up in the ball, fine. I'll get you depressed and you can curl up in the ball.
Right.
But I say, and then he had some very good prescient device saying, look, we've got the vote. That's the most thing. That's what you got to do. You got to get organized and don't give up. Losing an election is losing an election. Losing my mother is a tragedy. This is not a tragedy. Get up, fight.
Yeah. People always wonder if, when you become friends with the people that you write about,
Ain't gonna happen.
we befriended each other. I thought, maybe I'll get that extra star. Now, here I am. I'm stuck with you. But what was it like, sort of? I mean, you ended up in a situation where all these people became your peers, and because I know Jan is a crazy fanboy. Jan loves music, he loves musicians, and he can't help himself. So what was that like,
If you want to give back a star or two, there are other people who could use a little air. You may have gotten more 5 stars than anybody in history. Your records are so fucking good. It's been my pleasure and privilege to know and work with and be around some of the greatest artists of our times. And but how can I put this? No artist has ever really asked me to do anything I wouldn't want to do or wouldn't do. Nobody's ever come to me with that suggestion, or really maybe only 1 or 2 other people of videos have asked for a star or something or other. But I think that what I project and the friendships I have and the people I'm friends with understand the integrity with which Rolling Stone runs and with which I run it and with which they run their own lives, their own musical life, and write their songs and their operations. I mean, I really believe it was mutual respect made that possible, and just mutual love of the work. I mean, I love the work. I'm sure your records as much as you love them, in my fanboy way, and can share that excitement and thrill with you, and I'm grateful for it. At the same time that people I know, like whatever that are great people. I'm just fun to be with.
I'm just asking because, I mean, if I was reviewing a book, which I'm not doing,
oh,
but if I was, I would give you an extra star. I think one of the most fascinating parts of the book is, as I said when we came out, that we are old men attempting to gracefully face our extinction, though I don't think I want to see you gracefully do it. As Pete Townsend said about the Rolling Stones, don't grow old gracefully, my friend. It just wouldn't suit you. You know? But one of the most moving parts of the book to me were where you wrote about, you know, the illness. I mean, you have, over the past several years, you have gone through some really rough stuff, you know. A heart attack, you broke your femur, right? And I mean, you've
operation.
Yeah, big back operation. I mean, you've just really, I've watched you struggle through a lot of it. And the book, you write really, really well about it. And amazingly, you know, without any self-consciousness or self-pity, you know, I mean, Jan is a guy, is crazy, you know, you were always like, as you say in the book, you were, your failure to observe the posted speed limits was a big part of your personality, you know. Because really, you know, but it's a funny point we're at in our lives, you know. Like you say, the book is my last letter to you. How do you feel about, you know, where you are right now and this part of your life and having to have dealt with the stuff you've had to deal with over the past couple of years?
I feel really great. I feel as good now as I've ever felt, and I think now is the time.
Oh, okay.
All those questions. The issue now is how do you deal with age? You know, I think also already answered the question: is it appropriate to still be doing rock and roll at this age? I think it absolutely is. You know, it's still life and vital. I think that with age, the best thing you can look for is to have a sense of contentment. You know, that you lose FOMO. You know, you've got what you want. What you've got is lucky. You don't need to strive for anything more. Whatever it is you've got, whatever level of money or family or whatever, that's enough. That's great. You're lucky to be alive. In your last album, My Letter to You, is that the correct title, I think?
Yeah, that's close.
You're dealing with that's close? Right. Letter to You. It's called Letter to You. My original title for the book, based on it, was called Letter from the Editor. Yeah. And of course, he caught that right away. He says, that's a nice title. Where'd you get that? But it's to achieve that, and I think in the hospital is where I really started to write the book. And one of these, you know, I was dictating my sister things I wanted to write a book when I got to the hospital. I started dictating this list of things I wanted to cover, obviously incomplete and so on like that, but it's there. I wanted to, you know, now I just, you know, want to live well. I want to be with my family. I mean, pretty conventional things, but and it's a delicious time, I find.
I'm happy for you because I watched Jan struggle to walk using the walker, my friend, you know, and you've just handled it amazingly well. Well, we got questions from the audience here. I suppose it's at my discretion to answer these or not. All right, let's try one. Has anyone ever turned down the opportunity to be on the cover of Rolling Stone?
Oh, yeah. I think Joni Mitchell has turned it down. I think. Beyond that, I don't think there's anybody.
There you go.
I mean, they might turn down this opportunity, but no, I don't think I can't remember any offhand.
All right.
I mean, it was like such a iconic place to be. And we would send Annie or some of the best photographers, Herb or Avedon or Mark Selger. So it was a really desirable thing.
Yeah, it was. I was not on the cover of Rolling Stone when Born to Run came out. You know. I'm not picking a bone here or anything, but I always felt, you know, just while we're talking about it, I always felt you were a little little skittish about putting me on the cover when that record came out. I was on the cover of Time and Newsweek.
That's the
But
he was an establishment pig at that time.
that's right. Let's just go on.
I mean, nobody ever got on the cover of those two magazines at once. Bruce, it was a big publishing moment. It's a huge controversy in New York media between Time and Newsweek, and it went on for days. How did he,
where did this get?
And of course, my old pal and editor John Landau didn't say, well.
Yeah, but the worst part about this was the IRS noticed. No, I hadn't paid a penny in taxes when I was on the cover of Time and Newsweek, and IRS found out about that. And it took me about 10 years. If you could pick, I like this one. If you could pick only one issue of Rolling Stone to give to the aliens, what issue would that be? What's the one you think back and, man, that was, we hit it out of the ballpark on that?
Well, what do you want the aliens to think? Or is this about me? And do I want to show them my best issue? I would be concerned about the aliens, and so I would give them seriously, an issue with either you or Bob on the cover. Okay? If it was about me, and I haven't been on the cover, I don't know, it's tough. I can't really remember them all.
Yeah, if I was you, I would have put myself on the cover. I mean, after all that time.
I paid somebody off. Like I'd make my son to agree to this. And I don't know.
Okay, here's an interesting...
Jude in India, hi.
Oh, yeah.
Stand up, say hello for a second.
Did
My
they...
two 14-year-olds.
Oh, there they are.
What? Okay.
It's my godson. Okay. Does rock and roll still... And this is an interesting question because Rolling Stone defined the rock era in a sense that you were post-rock and roll. And if you consider rock and roll to be like Jerry Lee and Chuck and all the originators. And pre-hip-hop. Does rock and roll still have an important message for the next generation? I'm interested in the answer to this one myself.
Does it, rock and roll of what era? Of the post Chuck Berry era? Yeah. Have a message in these times with all the hip hop around?
No, just with
in general.
Just is there a message? Is rock music still vital enough to carry a cultural message? Do you think?
Yes, it is. I mean, not with the same intensity, because hip hop is carrying great messages, and for a long time has really vital, important stuff, as well as all the silly stuff about swag and so forth. Same with others, but rock and roll was married to that particularly historical moment in the 60s, where, as I say in the book, that was married to the post-war baby boom generation, which was the biggest, wealthiest, and best educated generation of Americans in history. At a moment, and it came into its early adulthood in the beginning of the 60s, when all this music exploded by these great originals, Bob and Mick and so forth like that, all working the same thing together at the same time, much like, say, in Paris, you had Matisse and Picasso and Leger all in one mix. And at this instantaneously, the technology came along to spread this music around the world. And finally, for free, everybody can get it. So I think that moment made it so hot, the heat was so high because of those factors. And I don't think we're going to see that again.
Yeah.
And so I think but in and of itself, I listen to rock, it still carries this huge message to me. I must say, not to flatter you again, but stuff you're doing, stuff I see Bono doing, Bob doing, writing about things in their own lives that are happening now and the world around them now keeps it so vital and so interesting and original and so passionate that it's still incredibly powerful stuff to listen to.
Yeah, I have to pretend like all of that's true, whether it is or not, actually. I mean, my job depends on it, you know. It's one of those. Let's see what we have here.
But I make the distinction that, like the Stones, who I love, the best rock, whatever, but they don't write new material anymore. So you go to a Stones show, and it's fantastic, but it's an oldie show. And if I go to a show, not your show, but
Thank you.
but that like you two or Bob is doing, they're talking about things that are going around the world around them, and that they see, and they're also talking about their own aging process. Things that are going through their maturity. That's maybe, Anyway, I take it back.
All right, let me see. I asked that one already. What are the 5 most important records? Let's just say for you. Go ahead. Pretend I'm not sitting here.
Once I ran into Bob Dylan backstage, and he's meeting me there. He goes, "Say, how's your friend Bruce doing?" I said, "Well, he's doing well. He's going around touring, now and doing a whole single record all at one time. Like I think he's now touring, doing Darkness on the Edge of Town." Mm-hmm. And Bob looked at me and goes, "Man, I should think that. Maybe I should go around doing Dark Side of the Moon." All right.
I'd pay to see that.
Yeah. It's just an impossible question. It's an impossible question.
Do you have any regret? One item on top of your bucket list that you didn't get that you might,
There's nothing I feel I missed. There are mistakes that I made in some of the articles published or not published. Some of the people I hired didn't turn out so good, but I don't have any big regrets, And if they're gone. I wish we hadn't published the UVA story.
Yeah.
But is that a regret? Yeah, it was a mistake we made. And I regret it. But do I feel my life is different, or would have been different? I didn't make that mistake. No, I'd take what I've got.
Right. Jason Bowangi, are you out there? What? How do you say it?
You're Italian, Bruce.
I know it's kind of not written well here. But it's a beautiful name. If you can go back and ask one artist a question you never got to ask, we're getting a little far out here now. What would that question be? Which artist? Was there an artist that you ever wanted to interview that you didn't get to interview, or interviews where you felt like I missed it, I didn't quite get to what I wanted to get to,
I would probably like to interview Leonard Cohen. I'd love to have interviewed Elvis.
Yeah.
And I would definitely like to interview Otis too. That would really have been. Chuck. The people who originated really haven't, but. I think the question always I want to ask is, like, where do you get that talent? Where did that talent come from? What in you makes you so fucking good at this?
This is fascinating because someone out there just asked this question. How did you know that you could create what you created? What was inside of you that allowed for that? Or what put the fire in your belly and the belief in yourself that you could do it? What was the creative impetus? I look back on my own stuff. I go, well, I was angry, and I felt invisible, and I wanted to be heard, and I had a variety of different feelings from growing up the way I grew up with my parents and their lives. I sort of. What was there anything in your personal history that drove you to, that drove you?
That's always kind of hard to know and hard to articulate, and was kind of the unasked question. But I think you're the sum of your genetic parts. You're the sum of your childhood experience, and you discover in you that you have to think you're special. And I think I always thought I was special, and that someday I would do something, I would achieve something. That was always within me. And as soon as I got to that place at Chadwick, where that opportunity was there, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I started off being a very unpopular kid there, and then running for student body president, doing this thing and that thing, and just achieving. I wanted to be somebody.
Yeah.
And that has stayed all the way through, and it's kind of driven me to where we are now, plus this talent I'd picked up to know how to edit or write. And then I must say again,
Where did that come from? Did you?
My mom was a writer and an editor.
Yeah.
And she would teach me how to do it. And I just was reading newspapers from when I was like 6 years old, and books, and putting out newspapers in the neighborhood. I had a little 10-year-old publication. It's the first one I started, called The Weekly Trumpet, which sold in the neighborhood. Had a gossip column, of course. I'm serious, it did. You know, Janice B. is dating Ricky. Is he the one? You know, that kind of thing. And there's
a whole other
Angela's
Us magazine. I was always wondering where that connection was.
and then I just got imbued with the fire of rock and roll. You know, and I thought, that's it. That's what I got to do.
Yeah.
Rock and roll.
As a magazine editor, you are the finder of stories. And we needed the stories of our own lives told back to us. We needed our generational story. I remember at the time, Rolling Stone, there was no mainstream media that was really interested in rock music as a serious, that it deserved any serious consideration. I guess all I'm going to say, you said in the book that Rolling Stone was a charter to examine all aspects of America. We needed that, you know, and you provided that. And is there could that even be done today? Is there a magazine that could do that today? I don't think so. You know, it was unique, you know, unique in publishing history, and just as somebody who was there in the Outlands, you know, and who really needed to be reminded that there was another life waiting when he wasn't so sure that there was, and to be reminded that, you know, you weren't alone. And the magazine provided an enormous amount of fuel and companionship for all of us who were out there and who needed it at the time. So I'm just going to finish off by saying, you did a good job. Thanks. Jan Winter, like a Rolling Stone.
Good job, boss.